Hello, ladies and gents, boys and girls, people of all ages, sexualities, and identities, and welcome back to another review. And today is a film/book review. Now, I thought I'd start off talking about the book because I've only just recently finished reading it, and I've noticed some subtle differences, particularly more to do with the ending of the book to the film. Now, of course, the majority of the book does stick to a lot of the plot of the film. I mean, for instance, we start off with Coriolanus Snow in the capital struggling and having flashbacks to when he was a child during the war. We also have this similarity in the book about just generally most of the story. From Coriolanus getting to be the mentor for Lucy Gray in the capital, to him having to go into the arena to save Sagittarius, to before that him having to convince the other mentors and people involved to feed the tributes rather than let them starve before the games, for him and Festus to come up with this whole betting system, to him then getting caught at the end of the Hunger Games about pretty much just helping Lucy Gray out. Then going off to District 12, becoming a peacekeeper, being involved with the whole peacekeeper routine, trying to hide his identity of being from the capital, meeting back up with Lucy Gray, falling madly in love with this girl, and spending so many joyous moments with her. However, this comes into my very first kind of thing that I wouldn't say is necessarily a change, but is a very important thing to the context of this book. The one thing I really liked that was embraced throughout this whole book is this idea of Coriolanus Snow constantly questioning the districts. There's bits of dialogue, there's bits of writing in this story in which in the book he is constantly second guessing things. I mean, he's been told about the districts. He doesn't live in the districts. He's been told about them numerously from Sagittarius. Sagittarius bangs on about District 2. He bangs on about the districts in general. Sagittarius moans at everyone in the capital about the way that the districts are treated. And suddenly, Coriolanus Snow is breathing in their air. He's by the hanging tree. He's by the mockingjays and the jabberjays and everything in the wild. And suddenly it slowly begins to break him. Not only mentally because he can't really survive without that support system, but also kind of in a more psychological way, where he's like constantly questioning. I mean, he's questioning Lucy Gray on her songs. When he was in the capital, he never did that. Why? Because it's entertainment. And even though it's still entertainment in District 12, he's questioning them more because she's starting to tell him the meaning behind the songs. For instance, one of the most common songs in this whole story that seems to play with him is there's two of them. One is definitely the hanging tree, because it's one that he even hums to on the train in one part of the book. The other one is this idea where Lucy Gray gets her name from a ghost girl, a girl who went missing in a blizzard and was never to be seen again. Now, they explain in the story that this is all due to the fact that everyone in the covey are essentially given names, and each and every one of them has their ballad for their name. For Lucy Gray, it's about a little girl who is off with her family and then they get stuck in a blizzard and then she's just never seen again. They have this whole beautiful melody of basically asking whether people can actually see her or not. When Lucy Gray begins to bring up the song, Maud Ivory also brings it up and kind of says to Coriolanus, what did you think of the song? Coriolanus isn't quite sure what to think of the song, but he does point out that it begins to make the girl more interesting. Maud Ivory points out this idea that maybe the song is a symbolization of the fact that Lucy Gray is only really truly seen by Coriolanus and a certain small individual group of her friends. Often to everyone else on the outside perspective, she's not really taken properly for face value. Then we go on to this kind of whole idea of Coriolanus and Lucy Gray running off from the capital, all after an incident at the Hob where Coriolanus accidentally lets off a gun and it doesn't only shoot Billy, who was Lucy Gray's ex, but it also ends up shooting the mayor's daughter. Now, of course, this whole idea of what's happened means that essentially Coriolanus is going to try and hide the weapons or try and figure out a way around it. Lucy Gray and him eventually manage to come up with this whole idea that they're going to run away. However, he ends up with an inner conflict when he realizes that he can go back to the capital. They offer him his position back, but only in District 2, which in his eyes is only a way to move up. When they get in the forest, he begins to suspect that Lucy Gray knows that he's done wrong when he accidentally says in a conversation that he murdered 3. Lucy Gray picks up on this due to the fact that in her Hanging Tree song, she talks about a man who's murdered 3. He also picks up on it because he only seems to be talking about Bobbin and the mayor's daughter. He seems to have forgotten or is on purposely misleading her about the fact that he's killed Sagittarius. Now, if you're wondering what I'm talking about with Sagittarius, essentially, Sagittarius starts waffling off to Coriolanus about the fact that he has a plan to help the rebels escape District 12. Coriolanus records him to the Jabberjays, which he hopes that they will not ever be listened to, but of course, eventually it gets to Dr. Gao, and she remembers what he said, and essentially goes and arrests Sagittarius. Sagittarius is then taken to the hanging dock and dropped. The interesting bit of parallel I find in this whole story is the fact that Sagittarius' death isn't the only one at the hanging tree. The original one was actually the beginning inspiration for what's going on. There's a man called Arlo and a woman named Lil. And Lil is supposed to essentially run away, but of course she stands and watch Arlo get his neck snapped. But back to like the end of the story, the one kind of core key detail I noticed between the changes is that in the book version of this, it's more focused on President Snow getting his kind of comeuppance on Gene Higginbottom and everyone in the capital who's wronged him. He kind of points out this idea that all these people should be careful with what they eat and what they do, because they never know when President Snow has done something to their food, to their resources, to anything. They also describe the fact that Sagittarius' parents basically just kind of adopt Coriolanus Snow. They were fed up with getting in so much trouble with their son that when he was... They didn't really... They grieved, but they could move on because Coriolanus Snow was still alive. The other thing I really like the detail of in the book is this idea of... Coriolanus even in the epilogue suggesting things that would actually make the Hunger Games worthy for the people in the districts. It's not just about getting them to watch, it's about them making feel like they've actually achieved something. And this is where the victor's house is coming. Now that I've talked about the book for a while, I thought let's get into the film. Now, I went and watched the film years when it first came out. I shouldn't say years ago, but whenever this film came out. But I went and watched it a couple years back, and I remember watching it and absolutely being astonished by this film. Now, keep in mind, I didn't read the book at the time, so I didn't really have any prior knowledge or what, and not being funny, my reading skills were appalling back then. But visually, this film really took me in. The cold open, the flashback, the constant cutting and kind of bits of wording that really gave me this stone cold 1984 kind of vibe. I loved watching Coriolanus and his kind of cousin both walking through this really desolate city. I also loved the addition of animals and things roaming free and them just kind of living in this war zone situation in which anything they eat and anything they breathe is a luxury. I also love that because it ties in perfectly with the juxtaposition with what I'm about to discuss, what I've already previously discussed about the book, is this kind of idea that Coriolanus goes from wartime to success. Now, it's explained in the book that this success is due to the fact that his father was a war hero. But it's also explained in the book and in the film, this idea that they're about to lose their home. They're not as wealthy as they should be in the capital. The capital is far, far ahead of them, and they are just barely scraping by. I mean, even in the beginning of this, when Coriolanus Snow is getting ready for his kind of day at the academy, he's gotten bits of a shirt it's tattered. It's been given to him. His cousin, who's a stylist, is doing her best, but she's having to use her free time to do it. And that, in a way, is kind of why he was perfect to be a mentor in the Hunger Games. Not only is he not the most richest person in the capital, but he can at least sympathize with this idea that people are hungry, people are starving. I also love how this draws into this kind of idea when we see those scenes in the film with him being in the Hunger Games arena with Sagittarius, is you can really see where Coriolanus' survival instincts kick in. Not only because a bomb drops on him and his classmates at one point before that, but also because he really is alert. He knows his surroundings, he knows when things are wrong. Now, something previously I forgot to mention because for some reason it slipped out of my head. Coriolanus goes to Dr. Gal's lab with one of his classmates. She lies about the fact that she wrote the note and she gets bitten in the neck. Well, I say in the neck, she just gets bitten in general. But essentially, scales begin to grow up on her neck. The one thing I like, though, in the book that I don't know if it's in the film because I have to rewatch the film tonight, is this idea that her neck was really, really scaly. Now, this comes into what I was about to bring up, is the fact that Lucy Gray survives the snakes because Coriolanus drops a handkerchief with her scent from when he visits her at the zoo. Coriolanus and Lucy Gray's kind of relationship that's blooming throughout the course of this film is absolutely superb. We get to see this district girl fall in love with this guy from the capital, but both of them are kind of fighting for their lives. Coriolanus on one hand is fighting against Dr. Gal and Dean Higginbottom, who are constantly challenging him. Whereas Lucy Gray is fighting to keep the audience constantly interested in her. She wants people to care. She wants people to feel like she has value. And the most important part of their relationship throughout the course of this film, all the way up to the Peacekeepers, is this idea that Lucy Gray honestly felt like before she wins the games that Coriolanus didn't care enough. But after that, she has this whole kind of overjoy that suddenly she's found someone who really does care. However, that relationship begins to twist when the pair of them are in the forest and he begins to try and hunt her down with a rifle. The other drawing point in this whole story is this idea that Flickerman and Lucky are constantly really annoying people with their kind of commentary. I also really love in this all the outbursts we get from the students. I like that the film really goes more in depth though and gives us a kind of grand scale of what the people in the arena are seeing. So we get to kind of feel like we're in there with them. But overall, the Ballad of the Songbird and Snake is absolutely incredible, and for that reason, I give it a solid 10 out of 10. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next review. Until then, goodbye, stay beautiful, and have an incredible night, you beautiful people.